is a sophomore at Stevens Institute of Technology in New Jersey. He is pursuing a major in biomedical engineering with a minor degree in public policy, and their research focuses on biomimetics, computational biology, virology, and biomedical imaging. So you want to go ahead and share your presentation, and once we're all set, you can go ahead and get rolling.
All right. Are you able to see my screen?
Looks like it's starting to pop up now. Yep, we can see it.
All right. Thank you very much for the introduction. For my research project, I worked on trying to figure out if the influenza vaccine had any, if the influenza is able, one sec, just, yeah, if the influenza vaccine has any effect in reducing COVID related mortalities or fatalities for that fact. I had been working on it like since last year. So thank you very much. So now for the brief overview, like in recent cases, especially there has been a surge in pandemics as well as epidemics, particularly relating to the spread of viruses such as the hepatitis C, the coronavirus, herpes viruses, and all of these. And if you look at the current COVID-19 pandemic, even though the United States and most of Europe as well as North America had made significant progress towards vaccinating the population, there still exists in many parts of the world where vaccine is not still not vaccination is not prevalent, especially in parts of Africa and like Southeast Asia and other parts of Western Asia, as you can see in the map. And the COVID-19 is also has a case fatality ratio of 2.3% and an attack rate of around 4.6 to 49.56. So there has been a lot of deaths in these countries. So, and most of the people who are suffering for COVID-19, they also have various comorbid conditions such as 37.3% for diabetes. This percentage number represents the likelihood that a person might die due to having COVID-19. 8.1% for cancer and 10.5% for cardiovascular disease. So how do we prevent this? So this is the question that that I asked for my research project, which was for this we analyzed over 20 research papers, which included peer-reviewed text, meta-analysis, original research, as well as uh, going through databases such as PubMed and ScienceDirect. So what were the study eligibility criteria for this? There were the inclusion and exclusion criteria where the age range for the participants were set to 18 to 60%, which was mostly looking through papers that were only looking at like this particular age group. And then the COVID-19 vaccine that was selected for the study was the mRNA vaccine, which is Pfizer and Moderna, because there were very few research papers that were talking about other vaccines as well. And the severity for a factor was taken as the mortality rate, which is the likelihood of death. So now let's briefly talk about the molecular comparison of the two viruses, which is the influenza as well as the COVID-19. Both of them are retroviruses, meaning that they are RNA-based viruses and they cause similar symptoms such as fever, fatigue, etc. And they might also cause pneumonia in certain cases. COVID-19 has additional symptoms such as blood clots or MISC in children or MISA in adults as well. So this is how the genome is like for molecularly, if you're looking at it. Influenza vaccine is more infectious, and SARS-CoV-2, which is the COVID virus, has a larger genome, meaning that it has the capability to encode for more proteins, and therefore it it doesn't go through mutation as much as the influenza vaccine does. And influenza undergoes something known as antigenic drift, which means that there are high likelihood that there will be mutations in the surface proteins, which meaning that the vaccine cannot exactly target the influenza vaccine as much effectively. And that's why you have to get influenza vaccines every next flu seasons because of this factor. And SARS-CoV-2 also has a more accurate copying mechanism, which reduces errors and therefore has less mutations. Then mechanisms of infection, both of them are retroviruses, and they target cells in similar manners. The target is the upper respiratory epithelial cells, and they spread through primary contact, which means that through coughing or like shaking hands or like ingesting some stuff. But where it basically differs is that in the influenza vaccine, influenza virus has a HA binding to the sialic acid, and that's how it enters. While the SARS-CoV-2 CoV2 has two receptors, which are the ACE2 receptor, which is the primary one, and it has the S1 and S2 domains, which helps it to infect cells. So this is a brief overview of how it spreads. And the ACE2 receptor, then the cytoplasm, it attaches there. It fuses with the membrane genomic RNA, and then it attaches and starts replicating itself within the cell. So this is basically about the spike protein. Most of the mutations in the SARS-CoV-2 virus that occurred is basically due to the changes in the spike proteins, which is mostly S1. Okay, now let's talk about the uptake of the COVID-19 vaccine as well as the flu vaccine. What are the similarities? Both are there are various types of vaccines, such as attenuated, where live viruses are used, inactivated subunit vaccines, as well as mRNA subunits. Basically, involves you take a part of the virus and then inject it to the person. And mRNA are mostly Pfizer and Moderna and builds your immunity. Now, some figures out for how COVID-19 and influenza, how they relate. Like currently in the global scale, in China, there has been 44,500 confirmed cases as well, till around March of 2023. And then there has been 14% dyspnea as well as hypoxia in such cases, which is like currently increasing the severity rate, as well as 5% will develop critical conditions. In the US, it was about 14.2% infected treated in had to receive ICU, and 12.2% needed mechanical ventilation. And there was one study done, which was by Dr. Anjali and colleagues, which they hypothesized about the odds ratio of the infections of COVID-19 and in reducing the outtake of the uh, virus, which means, and this study showed that the influenza vaccine played a primary role in helping reducing COVID-19 associated complications. And another study by Conlon and colleagues, which was carried out at around 27,200, 27,201 patients, they had an odd ratio of 0.58, and it showed similar results. There was also a retrospective study done on a lot of these cases, and the primary outcome basically compared the group positive testing, how likely the person catches COVID-19 and are tested positive after taking the influenza vaccine. And the secondary endpoints for this study were mortality, needs of hospitalization, length of stay, and like how severe the infection might be. And now, if we are looking at mortality and morbidity rates in other studies as well, one study done in Taiwan also showed similar results of 2.4% times greater chances of being hospitalized and 3.3 times greater chances of being transferred to intensive care unit if the person had not received the flu vaccine prior to contracting COVID-19. And this time period was about 120 days after vaccination. The one other stuff that we found out uh, in our study was that cardiovascular and pulmonary tract protection is also provided by COVID-19, which means that some papers looked into this and they didn't exactly study how the flu vaccine can help in the case of COVID-19, but there were various papers talked about this kind of stuff, which is the cardiovascular benefits of the flu vaccine. It has the capacity to reduce the risks of heart attack by around 28%, 24%, in lowers the risks of stroke and so on, especially on mortality risks as well as risks of developing a heart failure. And it does this by releasing nitric acid, which helps in pacing the heart in such a way that the heart is able to like recoup from the infection, from various kinds of stresses. And the bradykinin receptor is mostly responsible for this. Now, talking about cardiovascular protection, There was 2013 trials and a meta-analysis which showed around six randomized control trials. It lowers the risks of composite cardiovascular events than placebo or standard care or without the needing of vaccination. There are also a case where it prevented the infection of like other associated risks of cardiovascular health, like any other types of viruses as well, apart from COVID-19. It helps in establishing homeostasis, which means internal balance inside your body. Yeah, even if it was disrupted, and it boosts up your immune system, especially around your and cardiac system. And it also induced antibodies, which were through this receptor, and then releasing nitric acid. This is how it happens. The cardiac, pericardium and all these stuff, mostly they get relaxed due to the case of nitric acid, and then it helps in relieving stress, which basically improves heart health. Now, talking about briefly about the administration of the flu vaccine. The flu vaccine was around for a couple of decades, a lot of decades, and there has been new changes in administration, especially after the flu season, and it's always taken up and then looked into it. So uptake doses have changed. There has been trivalent, quadrivalent, as well as divalent vaccines that have came into the picture. Now, if you're looking into the effect of the flu vaccine on COVID-19 infections, um, most of these studies have shown that the flu vaccine have an effect. It does have a correlation in reducing COVID-19 infections as well as associated risks. That's what our the comprehensive review of all the papers like that we did, as well as like we are currently trying to work on this about creating a odds ratio of all these papers. That's what it major particularly found. There has been there are other questions that must be looked into this, which means is like does the gap in the booster, or like does a booster helps in giving like further protection, or is a divalent better than a monovalent in case of a strain coverage, like so that it covers a wide range of strains, like COVID-19 vaccine viruses as well? And will it help? Um, Now talking about the availability of vaccines, Southeast Asia, Africa, Latin America are all facing COVID-19 vaccine shortages. Africa, 2.8%. And this is basically a map which shows how many people have been vaccinated so far. So yeah, the flu vaccine does help. And then for the conclusion, it doesn't really mean that the influenza vaccine is a completely should replace the COVID vaccines, but for a time being, since influenza vaccines are mostly available in these countries, it can be used as a way to help curb the infections of COVID-19 during the limited availabilities in this in the vaccines. Thank you very much. That's for the acknowledgement. I would like to say acknowledge Dr. Malkin as well as my mentors, Emma Ju and Kayla Hendrickson. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Luke, for your presentation and for being with us today. Does the audience have any questions for Luke?
I have a quick question. What are the kind of the challenges that you find associated with this like meta-analysis? It seems like there's a lot of data out there. So how do you compile all this information and create those metrics that people can use to make informed decisions about vaccination and other things? I found this really fascinating.
All right. So for most of the data, like as I mentioned in my research as well, in my presentation, was that certain amount of these details, like they weren't exactly looking into how the flu shot will help in the case of like COVID-19 infections, like the ones relating to cardiovascular protection. So we had to analyze two sets of papers, one that looked into stuff like how it improves cardiovascular health and what those complications can mean in the case of COVID-19. There were papers that didn't look into cardiovascular protection in the case of influenza vaccine, but what are the complications in COVID-19 infections due to such complications. So like we had to like analyze both of these data as well as like factor both of them. And then we also did a study to like on all of the papers to like check whether the odds ratio and stuff of these are matching. And then we compiled results of our meta-analysis, and then basically we had a factor about which showed that there was an effective correlation to say that the influenza vaccine in some effect has an effect in like reducing COVID-19 infection rates as well as mortality. It doesn't fully help, but in cases where there's no access to COVID-19 vaccines, it does do help.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions from the audience? If not, again, thank you, Luke. And if you just want to describe what are your interests and what do you look to study potentially in the future?
All right. I'm actually mostly interested in like learning more about like stuff like synthetic biology as well as vaccination and how these kind of things help. I'm also currently working on with one of my profs in like soft matter brain tissue stuff like with flare imaging and stuff like that. So that's what I want to do in the future, like especially for like grad school and stuff like that.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you for being here with us today. Thank you for all the undergrad